Today we are back in Mark with another reminder of the importance of humble service to God. We see a lesson to learn from the disciples and a principle of service hammered home. Stick around to find out more. Recorded at the Running H Studio, you're listening to Venture Tabernacle. It's like venture capital, except that the investment is made in your soul. This is where America hangs out to talk about anything and everything from a biblical perspective. I'm your host, Ty Hervey. Join me as we learn to view the world through the objective lens of the Bible. All right. Hey, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Sunday Sermon, where we are going through the gospel according to Mark, verse by verse and story by story. Our text for today is Mark chapter 10, verse 35 through 45. I'll read it for you. It says, "And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, 'Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you.' And he said to them, 'What do you want me to do for you?' And they said to him, 'Grant us to sit, one at your right and one at your left in your glory.' Jesus said to them, 'You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?' And they said to him, 'We are able.' And Jesus said to them, 'The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those to whom it has been prepared.' And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, 'You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Out of this, we see two main lessons. First is of what it means to be a follower of Jesus regarding suffering. And second is a lesson on humility. This is a story about James and John, two of Jesus' closest friends and followers. James and John were actually two of the disciples who were in the inner circle of Jesus. Peter was the third one, by the way, and they were so close with Jesus, he gave them a nickname. You may remember it from chapter 3. It was Boanerges, or in English, Sons of Thunder. Now that sounds like a pretty cool nickname, doesn't it? Well, not exactly. It sounds cool, but it was a reference to their hot-headed nature. It would be the equivalent of me giving you the nickname Short Fuse or Caution Temperamental. And they prove him right several times throughout the Gospels, but especially in our story today. They asked Jesus to sit at his right and left hand on the throne in heaven. And what did Jesus respond back to them in verse 38? He says, "You do not know what you are asking." They didn't think they were pressed through before asking. Have you ever been in their shoes where your mouth talks faster than your brain works? I know I sure have. And when Jesus gets into the first lesson of his text, he says about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. He asks them, "Are you able to handle the suffering I am about to endure?" One of the key focuses of Mark's gospel account is on the suffering of Jesus as a servant here on earth. You see, Jesus didn't come to be glorified as he deserves. He came to serve and suffer for our sake, to set an example for us to follow. And that's what he means when he asked James and John if they were able to drink of his cup and participate in his baptism. He's asking them if they were willing to suffer to follow Jesus. And I think that's a question we should all ask ourselves. Am I willing to suffer to follow Jesus? Or am I just doing this because it's convenient right now? The men and women who have made the biggest difference for the kingdom of God were people who suffered tremendously to follow Jesus. Just in the Bible alone, you have dozens of examples of people who gave up everything to follow Jesus. Did you know that all but one of the 12 disciples ended up giving their life to follow Jesus? And I don't mean living to serve him. They certainly did that. But I'm talking about torture and gruesome deaths. They were stoned to death, beheaded, boiled alive, whipped to death, thrown off of high buildings. And that's just on top of what they endured while they were alive for following Jesus. Interestingly enough, John was the only disciple to die of old age, but even then he was imprisoned and exiled until he died. So in the first half of our story today, James and John got one thing right. They were willing to suffer for Jesus. Their lives proved that until the day that they died. We too should be willing to do whatever it takes to follow Jesus. In America, it probably won't cost you your life, but it might still cost you. Cost you money, power, influence, comfort, but the cost is worth it no matter how high. But then the story takes a turn for the worse, because in verse 40, Jesus shifts gears and addresses their pride. He tells them that their request, which was to sit at his right and left hand in heaven, was not his to grant. That honor was to be assigned by God the Father, and God had already prepared that seat for someone else. Who was it? Well, he doesn't say, but it wasn't James and John. And then Jesus uses this as a teachable moment, as he often does, to show his disciples and us how the kingdom of God is different than the world. He sets worldly leadership and godly leadership apart with one main difference. Worldly leadership is all about what I can get from people. How can they benefit me? How can they help me get what I want? But godly leadership is all about what I can give to people. How can I benefit you? How can I help you get what you need? The difference there is huge. And you'll see the difference when you get out into the workforce and work for different people. Some of you may have seen it. When you work for a godly manager, they want to help you be successful. But when you work for a worldly manager, they want you to help them be successful. In full disclosure, I have to be reminded of this from time to time, because I get so caught up in processes and events that I forget the reason that I lead is to serve others. I'm not in this for me. I'm in this for the kingdom. And all that I can ask is the same of you, is to choose to be in this for the kingdom and not yourself. If we can all get a handle on this, our lives will be changed and we can really make a difference for the kingdom of God. You may be doing this all the time already, and I want you to know how proud it makes me to know that you're out there serving and leading. But whether or not you're already doing this, we have always got room for improvement, to be the leaders that God created us to be. So let's learn from the mistakes of the disciples and not make them ourselves. That's why they're recorded, so that we have a chance to do better. For pride will never achieve the result of godliness that the Lord desires, but a humble heart can be used by God to change the world. And that marks the end of this episode of the Venture Tabernacle podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in with us. Remember, you are the marketing budget of this podcast. So if you got value out of this, leave us a 5-star review and share it with somebody else so that the word of the Lord will get out further and further into the world. We'll see you same place, same time next week.